Hey guys, we're going to talk about what actually happened after we fought in the American Revolution and after we declared ourselves independent. We wrote these things called the Articles of Confederation, and they just weren't that good. So then we had to go back and we were going to develop a constitution, but it was difficult and we had to come up with some compromises. So those are the things that we're going to be talking about tonight. Make sure that you are aware your next quiz will be on Thursday. Topics will be the Declaration and the Articles of Confederation. So make sure that you're paying attention tonight to those details. Make sure that you're taking notes. I think that we all understand the importance of this, hopefully by now. From your need-to-know basis, 1.5 is identify the problems in the American Revolution that caused the need for a stronger central government. 1.6 is identify the compromises debated at the Constitutional Convention. So your vocab is kind of lengthy because we are covering two objectives tonight. We start out with the Articles of Confederation and Shays Rebellion, followed by the the Land Ordinance and the Northwest Ordinance, the Constitution, the Virginia Plan, the New Jersey Plan, the Great Compromise, the Three-Fifths Compromise, and the Electoral College. So we're going to start out with the Articles of Confederation. So yes, we fought in the American Revolution, we declared ourselves independent, we won, and then we had to come up with our first form of government, which was the Articles of Confederation. There were a whole lot of weaknesses and very few. So starting with the first one, the states held all the power, okay? So 13 different opinions on every single issue because the states are in control. There's no one central government. Every state only got one vote, so it didn't matter if you were from a large state like Virginia or a small state like Rhode Island, you got one vote, okay? So small states were really excited about this, but larger states like Virginia definitely had a problem with only getting one vote because they were so large. Next up, they had no power to enforce the laws, okay? So again, we talked about this earlier, that if there's a law that is made that is not enforced, then you are going to basically do whatever you want to. There were no executive or judicial branches, okay? So the colonists, why, they're not going to want an executive. And if you think about it, the executive would be similar to something like a king. And of course, that's the reason that we fought in the American Revolution. So no, they're not going to want to go back to that same idea. There was no national army. The states still had armies. The country itself could ask for different states to send in different military personnel and soldiers, but there was no national army. So if the states refused to do it, then there was nothing that the federal government could do to really back that up, okay? And of course, the idea is what would happen if Great Britain turned around and tried to go to war with us again, or what happened if France came in and tried to go to war. So not necessarily the best thing. All right, the last weakness that we're going to cover tonight is no power to tax, okay? Now, we learned from the French and Indian War that wars are very expensive, okay? And how do we pay for them? We pay for them through taxes, okay? So we have a problem with the taxes, obviously, from the French and Indian War standpoint, so we don't want to tax again, but the problem is there is serious debt after the American Revolution. So, a couple of good things that came out of this were both based off of land. So the Land Ordinance and the Northwest Ordinance. I'm going to go back just a second to the Land Ordinance. This is basically the organization of new lands. Okay, so we knew that these 13 original colonies were going to spread west, and so we needed to have a plan to organize them. The Northwest Ordinance says that new states could join the United States when they had a certain amount of population. Okay, so both of those things were pretty good, but the rest of the stop sign, not so much. Okay, so the Articles of Confederation, they were pretty weak. If you look at the good things down here in yellow, there are only two of them compared to a whole lot of weaknesses. So Shays Rebellion is the thing that stopped the Articles kind of dead in their track. So, a guy by the name of Daniel Shays was a farmer, and he went off to war, and not only was he fighting in the war, but there was a huge drought during this time, and so his crops failed. Well, of course, if he's a farmer, then that's how he's going to make his living, and so the state wanted to basically put him in jail for not being able to pay his taxes, and he said, whoa, look, wait, hold on, I was fighting in the war, and we've had this horrible drought and things like that. So what he decided to do was to start a protest, okay? So what he did was to protest, and he gathered up a whole bunch of other farmers that were pretty much in the same situation, and they started to protest. And there was nobody who could really stop the protest of this farmer. And so the idea was, wow, if we can't stop a farmer, then how in the world are we going to stop an army or something a little bit more aggressive? We had to meet again. So we met back in Philadelphia for a constitutional convention, and it wasn't originally called a constitutional convention. It was led by James Madison and George Washington, and almost all of the states were there, 12 out of the 13, and they were supposed to revise the Articles of Confederation at first. And so it wasn't supposed to be, let's write a constitution, it was supposed to be, let's fix what we've already met. Well, the more they got into it, the more they realized that was not going to be the case. There were 55 delegates chosen by their states because of their influence. Now, if we remember anything about the founding fathers, that influence usually meant that they were prominent in their society, that they had land, that they had money, things like that. Thomas Jefferson and John Adams were not present. They were actually over in Europe at the time. So what we're going to see is an entire proceeding without them for the first time in our nation's history. So every state got one vote, okay? It didn't matter how big or how small you were. So there were 12 of them that were present, and so every state was going to get one vote. It was held in complete secrecy. Delegates needed to be able to talk freely. They didn't need to be convinced by outsiders about what they were needing to be doing about this entire country. So some of the major debates were the distribution of power, the rights of individuals, the rights of states, and slavery. So there's a whole lot of stuff going on during this time period. So what ended up happening was that they came up with the Virginia plan and the New Jersey plan during this time period. And it was based off of basically how are we going to do this whole legislative branch thing. Okay, so James Madison came up with a Virginia plan. He said, hey, we should have two houses. It should be bicameral. We're going to call it Congress. And it's based off of population. The representation is going to be based off of population. Again, really good for a large state like Virginia. Smaller states like New Jersey, Rhode Island, Connecticut, they were looking at this thinking that's not a really good idea for us because no matter what we do, we're going to be overpowered by the larger states. So they wrote their own plan, okay, called the New Jersey plan. Very similar to the Articles. It only had one house in Congress, and it was equal representation by state. Again, one vote per state. Well, they're not going to agree on anything, so what was a guy from Connecticut came up with what we call the Great Compromise or the Kinetic Compromise. And this basically was a merging of the two plans that I just talked about. It was a two-house Congress. The House of Representatives, which we still have today, is based off of population. And this was based off of the Virginia plan. Then we have the Senate, and that's going to be based off of equal representation, again, drawing its links from the New Jersey plan. So that's what we're going to kind of get into. The 3/5 compromise was basically brought about by the southern states. Southern states, although they wouldn't count slaves towards anything else and wouldn't give them any rights, they were wanting to count them towards their population because it would give them a larger population in the House of Representatives. And so the grand number they came up with was 3/5. So every slave would count as 3/5 of a person towards representation in the House of Representatives. They were still not given the right to vote. Up next, we have slave trade and commerce. The North basically wanted Congress to control all of the trade. Okay, the South was really concerned about doing that because, of course, they did not want their exports to be taxed. They didn't want to be taxed on things that they were selling to overseas. And they were also concerned that they were going to have to stop importing slaves. And of course, that's how most of the southern states made a lot of their money. So the compromise that they came up with said, okay, Congress can control trade. They are not going to tax exports. And slave trade was going to end in 1808. Does not mean that slavery was going to end in 1808. It means that the slave trade was going to end in 1808. Very important fact. All right, the Electoral College is something that is still around till today, and we will actually talk about this in one of our later units in a whole lot more detail, but I wanted to kind of bring it up now because this is when it was decided. The Congress are the people deciding the president, okay? So this was the time period that basically the people who wrote our founding documents were scared of the average American being able to voice his or her opinion about a specific candidate or a topic. And so what they decided was this Electoral College was basically going to determine who the next president was. So every state got votes based off of their number of representatives in Congress. So it's your total representatives. So it would be the number that you have in the House plus your 2 senators. And we'll get into that a little bit later. So you can see here the Electoral College map. You can see that North Carolina has 15 Electoral College votes, which seems kind of big until you look over at California and they have 55. And their population is just that much larger than the population of here in North Carolina.